you sacrifice from the school. It's very but anyway, we're doing that for people like these things. Yeah? Or not?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to John Cabot University. I'm Professor Enrico Fardella. I'm Associate Director of the Guarini Institute for Public Affairs, and I'm particularly honored today to have a very special guest. Professor Moon Chung-in is coming from Korea. Professor Moon Chung-in is, for all of us working on Northeast Asia, is a legend. Everyone who lives and who works in this field knows Professor Moon. Books, actually he wrote 60 books, more than 100 articles. He's just one of the most prolific, and he's like a prominent figure in Korea. He's been special advisor for the Korean president on foreign affairs and national security, and he's now distinguished professor at Yonsei University, but he has so many titles and such a huge experience that I strongly suggest you to check him out on Google, because otherwise we're going to spend the whole night just reading at this title. So please join me to welcome Professor Moon with an applause. I mean, we have to somehow match the joy and excitement for having Professor Moon tonight with a moment of sorrow. President Franco Paoncello cannot be here tonight, and he sent me a note because that I'm about to read you. Dear members of the John Cabot University community, it's with a heavy heart that I share the deeply sad news of the passing of our student, Simone Ricciotti, who tragically lost his life in a car accident on his birthday 2 nights ago. Simone was a beloved member of our community and was expected to graduate in May 2026. Our thoughts and prayers go to Simone's bereaved family and loved ones during this profound, sorrowful time. Franco Paoncello. So, if you don't mind to join us for 1 minute of silence, standing.
Okay, yes. Yes, yes.
It's always so difficult to shift from this news something else, but we gotta do that. Okay, so we invite Professor Moon at John Cabot University, and we already actually enjoyed 2 days with him. I think he can stand us no more. But no, we really had a truly amazing exchange, with the students and the session on Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was really fascinated by his broad knowledge. And so before this event, we were discussing how to structure it, and I think that the best way for it would be to have like a general overview on the future of the Korean Peninsula, as you can tell from the title. But maybe 20 minutes more or less, and then we try to enjoy a very intense and interactive Q&A session. How about that? Okay? So thank you so much for coming. Professor Moon, the floor is yours.
And you're not sitting here?
Okay.
And thank you very much, and my condolences to Simone. And it is a great honor for me to give a talk today. In fact, I haven't heard about the John Cabot University, but my dear friend John Hillary was a visiting fellow here, and I learned about the John Cabot University through him. And also, I arrived in Vienna a month ago. I visited the Webster University in Vienna, and it was very similar to Webster University. And they spoke very highly of the John Cabot University. Therefore, it's a great honor for me to be here. And also thank you very much for inviting me. And Nico is the person who engineered everything. And also, before I start, I wanted to give you a gift. Some of you might have signed it. And I am founder and editor-in-chief of Global Asia. It's a quarterly journal. I would say it is the only English quarterly journal throughout Asia. It is like an Asian version of foreign policy or foreign affairs. I will circulate this one along with this piece of paper. You can write down your name and email address, and I will put your names on the free distribution of this Global Asia. The journal will be very useful to you. Therefore, it is my gift to you for attending this in a lecture. Simon, you can keep that copy for you, okay? Oh, thank you. So you have that works. Okay, 20 minutes, condensing the future of Korea, and I did job, in recovering democracy, But still, we do not know the future of Korean democracy. But so far, so good, and National Assembly working well. They are very well institutionalized check and balance among three branches of government, but still, crisis democracy will continue to be a major challenge in Korean society. Second crisis is a crisis of peace and security. As I pointed out, inter-Korean relations hit the bottom. North Korea has not given up its hostile attitude toward South Korea. And South Korean government is trying to reduce tension, build confidence, and create a peaceful coexistence with North Korea. The North Korean position is so firm. If I don't know what will happen, therefore the crisis of security and peace in South Korea is another major challenge facing entire Korean peninsula. Third crisis is with Europe, economic stagnation. We used to enjoy 5 to 6% annual growth rate. Now we have 1% growth rate. We haven't recorded negative, minus growth rate. Therefore, there's better news. But we are still struggling to maintain 1 to 2% growth rate. But without economic growth, you cannot create employment. Without employment, you cannot ensure social stability. Therefore, we are in very precarious situation. Finally, Korean society has become extremely polarized, like in Europe, right and left. Confrontation has been deepened, and they have become extremely, politicized. And also, like in Europe, right wing in South Korea forming a coalition with MAGA people in the US, and then the left in South Korea strongly opposed it, development. Therefore, that kind of polarization might become a major impediment to creating social stability and harmony in South Korean society. Therefore, we are facing 4 major challenges. Of these 4 major challenges, I think the most critical one is the crisis of peace and security. Right now, the new government in South Korea is facing several challenges. Most imminent challenge is coming from North Korea. One people. North Korea and South Korea are 2 separate states, and their relations are hostile. Therefore, he came up with a theory of 2 hostile state relations. And also, he declared that the North Korea does not want unification. His rationale is very straightforward. Whether it is a progressive or conservative government in the South, their goal is to force the collapse of North Korean regime, achieve German type of unification by absorption. Therefore, his position is 2 people, 2 states, 2 systems, and 2 governments. And therefore, he wanted to, the North Korea has been calling South Korea no longer as South Korea, as a Republic of Korea. And North Korea wants us to call North Korea as a DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. His rationale is very simple. Now, we are 2 separate states. The Republic of Korea should honor international law. 4, mutual respect of territory, sovereignty, and non-interference with domestic affairs. Okay. And probably the South Korea has a constitution which stipulates that the territory of Republic of Korea includes the entire Korean peninsula and its joint islands. Therefore, from our constitutional point of view, North Korea is illegal regime. Therefore, North Korea argues that as long as South Korea retains their constitutional, stipulation, there is no chance for peaceful coexistence between the North and the South. Therefore, it is a very precarious situation. Second challenge comes from North Korean nuclear threat. North Korea has nuclear facilities. North Korea has produced nuclear materials, both plutonium and highly enriched uranium. North Korea is known to have acquired at least 50 nuclear bombs, up to a maximum of 120 nuclear warheads. North Korea has a variety of delivery vehicles: short-range ballistic missile, mid-range ballistic missile, intermediate range ballistic missile, and ICBM, aiming at US mainland. And also North Korea claims that it has acquired submarine-launched ballistic and cruise missiles. And most importantly, North Korea undertook 6 rounds of nuclear tests. More than that, since 2 years ago, North Korea claimed that it has a miniaturized nuclear warhead, and it has made the nuclear bombs in Russia, China, UK, and France. Therefore, we do not recognize India, Pakistan, Israel as a nuclear weapon state. In the same context, we cannot recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. But what is worse is this: since Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin lowered the nuclear threshold by threatening to use tactical nuclear warhead preemptively. North Korea is following the same line. 2 years ago, Kim Jong-un declared that there has been change of nuclear doctrine in North Korea. North Korea used to pursue no first use doctrine. North Korea will never use nuclear weapons preemptively, but they changed that doctrine. And they argue that the nuclear weapons has a second mission for preemptive use in the case that the North Korean sovereignty and territory are severely threatened by conventional or nuclear threat by enemies. Therefore, Kim Jong-un said that North Korea can use tactical nuclear weapons preemptively, even if other enemy countries do not use nuclear weapons. And more than that, the North Korean leader claimed that it has created 8 companies that handle tactical nuclear weapons, and he has deployed those 8 companies along the front line. But we do not know where they have deployed. Even we cannot come up with a verification of existence of those kinds of 8 companies that handle tactical nuclear weapons. But this is a Korean situation. It's a very serious problem. Okay? Third challenge is the challenge of ROK-US alliance. We are suffering from the Trump 2.0 shock, like European countries. President Trump wants South Korea increase its defense burden sharing from current 2.6% of GDP to 5% of GDP. He also wants South Korea to increase its defense cost sharing to support American forces stationed in South Korea from current level of $1 billion per year to $10 billion per year. Whenever there is changes of American forces in South Korea, there was a close consultation with the South Korean government on the in and out of American forces. But now the United States want to take in, take out its forces without due consultation with the South Korean government. And lastly, the United States wants South Korea to make a formal commitment that it will come up with a military support for the US in the case of major contingencies in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. Okay. And of course, South Koreans are worried about fear of entrapment. Okay. Because South Koreans do not want to get involved in a conflict where there are no our national interests. Okay. Therefore, now U.S., South Korean relations are getting worse because, and also President Trump quite often used the card saying that if South Korea does not come up with more defense burden sharing, more defense cost sharing, U.S. may reduce its forces in South Korea, even withdraw its forces from South Korea. Okay. Therefore, there is a high degree of uncertainty on the part of the United States. There is a big challenge for President Lee Jae-myung of South Korea. First challenge is the challenge of sandwich dilemma between China and the U.S. As you all know, China and U.S. are engaging in fierce competition, rivalry in the areas of geopolitics, geoeconomy, technology, and values, and even ideology. Okay. U.S. wants South Korea to take side with the United States to deter rise of revisionist power of China. China wants South Korea to not to take side with China, but to retain at least a neutral position between China and the United States. And in geoeconomic arena, U.S. wants South Korea to decouple, de-risk its trade and investment with China. The U.S. has been wanting South Korea reshore, friendshore, nearshore its trade and investment away from China into the U.S. and Southeast Asian countries. And technology, now Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have huge semiconductor chip plants in China, Xi'an, and to other, or any kinds of technology sharing with China. Finally, during the period of President Biden, U.S. strongly wants South Korea to be a major partner in promoting our democracy and human rights. In fact, the Yoon Suk-yeol government co-hosted the Democracy Summit of Democracy, okay, or Coalition of the Willing, okay, in Seoul, South Korea. And target is obviously autocratic states, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, whatever. Okay. And the whole issue of, and previous government in South Korea was taking the position of that we are strongly opposed to change of status quo by force, okay, aiming at China, because U.S. want us to take the position. But likewise, we are really sandwiched between China and the United States. Therefore, that has become one of the major challenges. There's one more element that is, the worry about the advance of new Cold War structure in Northeast Asia. China, Russia, North Korea, DPRK, are intensifying their cooperation, particularly the September 3rd Victory Parade in Beijing this year. There is worry that there could be great advancement of northern trilateral axis involving Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang. And on the other hand, the United States want to strengthen U.S., Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation. But South Koreans worry if there is a rise of these two northern axis and southern axis, that will be revival of, that will be reminiscent issues. Now, did I consume all time?
Oh.
Okay. Then what the new government in South Korea is trying to handle those kinds of problems. As to North Korean threat, the President Lee Jae-myung made it very clear. My primary goal is peace. He came up with a very interesting argument saying that winning war is important, but winning war without fighting is more important. But more valuable and important is to create peaceful conditions under which there is no reason to fight each other. There is his basic philosophy of peace. And then he argues that what is important right now is tension reduction, confidence building, peaceful coexistence. Therefore, he has been emphasizing preventive diplomacy. And also, national independence in his National Independence Day speech on August 15 this year, he came up with very clear principles on North Korea. He said, I will recognize North Korea as it is, not as we want to see. Therefore, he literally recognized the existence of the North Korean regime. And this is kind of strategic empathy. And also, second, he argued that we will not seek unification by absorption. And third, he argued that we will not show any hostile intent and policy on North Korea. Therefore, he sent a very clear message to North Korea. The North Korean response was not reciprocal. North Korea is still suspicious of South Korean motive and still hesitant to come up with South Korea, with South Korea. But now the situation is very bad. All channels of communications are gone. Our president used to maintain hotline with North Korean counterpart. Now it is dead. Our intelligence agency used to maintain hotline with its counterpart in Pyongyang, but its counterpart was dissolved. Department of United Funds was dissolved. Therefore, no hotline. The military used to maintain 3 major hotlines. One in the West Coast, the other is East Coast, and third one in demilitarized zone. They are not working. North Korea is not picking up the phones. And our Ministry of Unification used to maintain administrative hotline in Panmunjom. Those NGOs, so-called pro-North Korean NGOs. But North Korea has severed all the ties with pro-North Korean NGOs. Because North Korea used to maintain its liaison people in Shenyang and Beijing. North Korea withdrew them all. Therefore, South Korean NGOs cannot have any contact with them. And also, whenever there are stalemate inter-Korean relations, we could have asked the American government to intervene, because the American government used to maintain its communication channel with the UN mission of DPRK. These days, that line does not work. That is why President Trump could not meet Kim Jong-un, because simply the North Korean mission at the United Nations is not accepting any letters and messages from White House and State Department. Therefore, that is not working. And also in the past, we used to utilize China. Chinese, Zhongyangbu, in international relations, Department of International, very, very difficult environment. Therefore, I don't know how he overcome it. Therefore, he appealed to President Trump. President Trump, you become peacemaker. Talk with Chairman Kim Jong-un. I'll be your pacemaker. Therefore, if you can revive dialogue with Pyongyang, then South Korea can get a benefit of linkage effect from that one. That is our situation. But anyhow, President Lee Jae-myung is very much committed to reviving channels of communication with North Korea, engaging meaningful talks about tension reduction and confidence building measures. That is his approach. Second, about the North Korean nuclear issues. South Korea's traditional position was very similar to that of Japan and the United States. Denuclearization of North Korea. Okay. Therefore, if North Korea does not want to talk about denuclearization, there is no meaning of having any dialogue with North Korea. Therefore, at the entrance of any dialogue or negotiation with North Korea, denuclearization has to come up with the first. But President Lee Jae-myung recently announced that he will be changing the position. He wants to be more realistic. Now, North Korea has nuclear weapons. Even though we cannot recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, we should be aware of the existence of nuclear weapons capability in the hands of North Korea. Then what is a sensible approach? Okay, let us talk about the freezing North Korea's nuclear and missile activities and rolling back North Korean nuclear and missile capability. As for denuclearization, let us discuss in the medium to long-term period. But it makes a whole lot of sense because according to Siegfried Hecker, one of the renowned experts on North Korean nuclear problem, he argues that in order to have a verifiable dismantling of all the nuclear facilities in Yangbyang alone will take at least 10 to 15 years. Therefore, fixing denuclearization in the short time span totally does not make sense. Therefore, President Lee Jae-myung has been arguing that we'll go for the 3 stages: freezing, rolling back, reduction, and ultimately denuclearization. Therefore, that signals a great change. Of course, there is a strong domestic opposition. Okay. Therefore, conservative President Trump shares with President Lee Jae-myung. President Trump's approach is what? And North Korea has nuclear weapons. He even used the term, North Korea is a nuclear power country. Okay? And we got to be more realistic. Therefore, leaders to leader, there is a consensus, but all these bureaucratic agencies are strongly opposed to that idea. As for our KS alliance, President Lee Jae-myung's position is very clear. Now is the time for us to regain our strategic autonomy. And South Korea should be the main fighting forces. American forces be supporting forces. Because up to now, wartime operational control is in hands of American commander in South Korea. American commander in South Korea has only 26,000 forces, but in South Korean forces South Korean forces is what? 550,000 soldiers. Therefore, commander 26,000 are exercising operational control over 500,000 South Korean forces at the time of war. Therefore, it is totally, in a sense, nonsensical. Therefore, President Lee Jae-myung wanted to regain wartime operational control so that we can play a more important role in defending ourselves. President Trump likes it. And also Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, also said that it is a good idea for South Korea to get back wartime operational control. Okay. Then that being the case, then South Korea may have to increase its defense spending while reducing defense cost sharing with Americans for the American First Forces stationed in South Korea. And also as for the strategic flexibility, President Lee Jae-myung strongly opposed that idea. If American forces in and out freely without due consultation, that will enhance the strategic stability and instability on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea can take advantage of that situation for its military advantage. Therefore, American forces in South Korea should be geared toward deterrence against North Korea. And also, President Lee Jae-myung is somewhat hesitant to make any formal commitment to the deployment of South Korean forces to contingencies in the Taiwan Strait in South China Sea and on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, President Lee Jae-myung wanted to delink these two tiers within East Asia. There is much more complicated issue. Therefore, and apart from that, there are concerns because American foreign policy has become very unreliable, unpredictable. Okay? America, from time to time, talk about reduction and withdrawal of American forces in South Korea, whatever. The South Korean debate is now focusing on can we survive without American forces? Okay. And then argument is this, we have a much superior conventional forces against North Korea. But what we are lacking is nuclear capability. Therefore, if the United States continue to provide us with extended nuclear deterrence, then we can handle North Korean problem without presence of American ground troops in South Korea. Okay. And if U.S. does not provide us with extended nuclear deterrence, then South Korea can go nuclear. And U.S. does not want nuclear proliferation. And also U.S. will know if South Korea and Japan go to nuclear, they will not listen to the U.S. Okay. American hegemonic leadership will be seriously challenged if Japan and South Korea go to nuclear. Okay. Therefore, as an offshore balancer, U.S. Will continue to provide South Korea and Japan with nuclear umbrella. Okay. That is the way I read it. But China, U.S. strategic rivalry, it will be much tougher for South Korea to adjust. But Lee Jae-myung will try to harmonize, alliance with the U.S. and strategic cooperation partnership with China. It will be tough. But Lee Jae-myung has a very clear understanding that China is too near and powerful to antagonize China, to ignore China. He's an extremely pragmatic person. I had a chance to discuss with him, and his view is very simple and straightforward. And also he has a different view too, because he was asked by, I think, BBC, what do you take on the whole Chinese invasion of Taiwan? And his answer is that it might be like aliens invading Earth. That was his perception. Therefore, it will be anyhow tough. But Lee Jae-myung is known as anti-American, pro-North. And even Japanese Prime Minister both Ishiba and Takaichi are saying that President Lee Jae-myung is truly a great friend of Japan. Therefore, so far he has been doing an excellent job. I don't know how long can he continue. He can continue that positive perception. And finally, all this new Cold structure in Northeast Asia, he's strongly opposed. I don't know how he can handle it, but his new Cold structure in Northeast Asia is a function of overall power configuration and changing leadership calculation. But his position is very clear. Okay? There should be no revival of old Cold structure on the Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia. Therefore, he is in very strong favor of CSC, OSC, Helsinki process. I don't know now, even OSC is having a hard time in Europe too, but OSC has never tried it in our part of the world. There are some scholars now argue that the OSC model or Helsinki process model should be seriously considered by East Asian people. Okay, something that I talked too much, and Nico, sorry.
No, it's not too much.
What is the future? I don't know. But one thing, there will be no war on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. Okay. Because we have too much to lose. Okay. China, even North Korea too, South Korea, Japan. Okay. And US, I don't know, but at least countries in Northeast Asia strongly believe that we have too much to lose through war. Therefore, there is kind of built-in mechanism to prevent outbreak of war. But in doing that, I think the Israeli government has some commonalities. His policy is called the pragmatic diplomacy policy, and his pragmatic diplomacy policy is in fact based on the concept of seeking truth from facts. Okay. What is meant by therefore, seeking truth from fact is one of his most important principles of foreign policy. Second issue is what? Placing yourself in others' shoes. hold the issue of strategic empathy. It's another very important element of his foreign policy. Third one is what I call the minimax approach. Minimize risk. That means what? In terms of national consensus. It will not be easy, but Korea is too polarized. But he wanted to do that. And in doing that, he hasn't really declared yet, but he is very much interested in promoting ties with the European countries. So, because for him, diversification is very important. Okay. And US-China's strategic rivalry will be protracted. And the only way we can prevent, mitigate the conflict between the two, try to come up with a new regional and international order, is to cooperate among middle powers. Okay. South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, Italy, France, Germany. These countries should get together, come up with alternatives to avoid and mitigate US-China strategic rivalry and make the world much more peaceful, safer, and prosperous. Our statement.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So many points, and I wrote several questions, but I just take the liberty as a chair of this panel to ask one question that is actually goes beyond my expertise. To be honest, I don't know how to respond, so it's a genuine question. Because at the beginning, you mentioned about the South Korean constitution, and the fact in the South Korean constitution there is written that South Korea considered the whole territory of Korea as one, and this is somehow, according to what I perceived, is a sort of obstacle. It's considered a perception. So my question to you is that, to what extent this reflects like South Korean public opinion? So do people support this principle, or is there space for reform of the constitution as a sort of possibility to send like a message to North Korea, to change somehow the framework of the dialogue with the North Korean side?
It's very sensitive questions. Yes, South Korean people strongly believe in Article 3 of our Constitution. North Korea is part of the Republic of Korea's territory. At the same time, they recognize North and South Korea two separate states. They joined the United Nations simultaneously. Therefore, I would say that South Koreans are very much ambivalent about Article 3 of our Constitution. But I think that in coming months, there will be fierce debate on Article 3 of our Constitution. It's in a sense, organized presidency. Therefore, if that debate continues, then this Article 3 issue may be included in that debate. But ordinary people think that, North South Korea live separately, They don't fight each other, cooperate each other. Let us people goods and service move freely. That is ordinary people want. But if we, change Article 3 of the Constitution, and if we can create that kind of situation, a lot of South Korean people will support.
Excellent. So let's open the floor for Q&A. We have yes. Let's start with this. Francesco, let's start with the students concerned. Moose.
Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for your grounded insight that's yet optimistic. We talked a bit about the evolution of the nuclear doctrine, and I wonder that we have, on the one hand, a changing discourse with Russia lowering the threshold and North Korea shifting narrative to a more preemptive usage. And on the other, we have a decline in US foreign policy reliability. I'm wondering for the future if there is a certain red line that you can imagine that urges a reconfiguration in alliance if US credibility as a nuclear offshore deterrent declines in the eyes of the domestic population. Thank you.
So if I may, I would like to add like 2 fingers on this, because one of my questions actually was related to this, because you mentioned that in this new posture of North Korean that moved from like no first strike into a preemptive possibility to use like tactical nuclear weapons, and you mentioned that there are like probably already some companies that have been deployed this kind of technical. So in which scenario do you envision, or South Korea envision this option to be used?
We all know the tragedy of nuclear weapons. Okay? You might have read Annie Jacobson book on the nuclear war. That we're all aware of it. But what we are really concerned, North Korea or the United States will or can use nuclear weapons preemptively. The whole issue is what? Escalation from conventional conflict to hybrid conflict, including nuclear weapons. Therefore, there is absolute inferiority in conventional forces on the part of North Korea. The only way they can cope with allocate US combined conventional forces is to rely on tactical nuclear warfare. Therefore, in the past, North Korea was paying attention to strategic weapons, which ICBM, targeting US mainland. Okay? But now, they're talking about tactical nuclear weapons. They're targeting South Korea, an American military base in South Korea, or Japan. Okay? Therefore, North Korean concept completely changed. But on the acute military tension, even minor military crash can escalate into full-blown conventional conflict, and in the case of sense of, paranoia on the part of North Korea, then North Korean leader can order the use of tactical nuclear weapons. That is really worrisome aspect.
Yeah, we have one, 1 second. We have one question there. You raised your hand first, yes, please. Then Simeon and Francesco, and one here.
It's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to know if I'm allowed to ask questions regarding the internal issues in South Korea. Am I allowed to do that?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I think it's relatable to the region. As I know, there are lots of issues in South Korea, like South Korea is the second highest suicide rate with 25.2% per 100,000, and it has the lowest fertility in the whole world, and there are lots of problems like the oligarchy families in South Korea, families who are controlling Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and there are lots of pressure on the youth, and most of the suicides are teenagers because of the exams they have to do for entry for universities, and if you succeed in the exams, you're set for life, and if you're not, you're seen as a disgrace. And with the issues inside the South Korea, I believe the way it's going, what's the word for it? The way it's going, don't you think that it needs a fresh start, a refresh, everything?
The sense of question is that there are a lot of issues, a lot of tension, like social issues within South Korea, and he.
What will be the future of South Korea in, with all these issues? What's the
fertility rate and the
what's the solution for it?
The new generation.
It's not easy to tell, but as you pointed out, the South Korea has a lot of so-called structural weakness and vulnerabilities, low fertility, now low economic growth, okay, and particularly low fertility is a big issue, because according to one forecasting by year 2050, Korean population will decline from the current level of 52 million to about 500,000 soldiers, but within 10 years, that will go down about 300,000, okay, almost same level as Japan's self-defense forces. Therefore, we have a myriad of questions. But that is why President Lee Jae-myung are focusing AI. Okay, therefore the labor-saving technology. Okay, and also try to come with a couple of strategic industrial sectors with great forward and backward linkages. Okay, therefore even if we have a low fertility rate, well, so that our society can show high degree of resilience. But in other words, you're right. South Korea is full of, uncertainties, okay, structural weakness. But one thing is this: South Koreans are good at one thing. When there are no challenges, South Korean society is extremely lazy and uninterested. But when there are challenges, the Koreans tend to unite it, work together, come up with breakthroughs. And I think that is the way we have survived for the past 5,000 years. Therefore, I know it is not a scientific answer to your question, but I have some sense as a Korean. Therefore, when peacetime, nothing works in Korea. But in crisis time, we work together and we come up with, look at the APEC summit. Everybody thought that the APEC summit will fail because Gyeongju didn't have even hotel accommodation, whatever. Then we have some ingenuity, some guy suggested to Prime Minister, why don't you charter ferry, cruise? And they did. And some country delegations stayed in a ferry, not in the hotel. Therefore, it can be a minor episode, but I believe in one thing. Koreans are very strong at crisis. And sometimes they are, hubris and overconfidence. It can destroy us, but generally, when there are crises, we tend to unify, we come up with collective solutions to the problem. I still believe in it.
Professor Michael Drissen is director of our Master in International Affairs. That was, where the students you met yesterday, is actually the co-organizer of the event tonight. Michael.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Thank you so much for this talk. We're so grateful to have you here. And excuse my ignorance in asking this question, but I was very interested in what you said about the megaization of South Korea, and I wonder if you could just give us a brief idea of what that looks like in domestic politics. Does it show up in culture wars? Is it social conservatism? Is it just, how does that?
1 week before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, he came to Korea, okay? And he was instrumental in setting up so-called the rebuilt Korea. That is just replication of Turning Point USA. And Charlie Kirk played a very important role in setting up rebuilt Korea and rebuilt Japan. And those people who attended the rebuilt Korea convention are mostly Protestant, the children of Protestant churchgoers, okay, in the 10s and 20s. And they paid a huge attendance fee, and Charlie Kirk gave a speech. And of course, he was conveying all these American Christian nationalist messages. And also, those who follow their line, evangelical Protestant, people, they argue that President Yoon Suk-yeol didn't do anything wrong. He did the right thing. Okay? He didn't violate the Constitution. It is a progressive in South Korea, works in South Korea, okay, who forcefully impeached him and imprisoned him and suppressing so-called evangelical Christians and whatever, and their supporters. That has become domestic political debate in South Korea, because they think that the progress argue that those MAGA and their supporters in South Korea, they are violating constitutional order, South Korean law. Okay? But those MAGA people and their supporters in South Korea argue that those are the progressive and leftist works. They are the source of the problem. Okay? Therefore, that has become domestic political issue. And second, foreign policy issue is this. All those followers of MAGA in South Korea, they argue that President Lee Jae-myung and his supporters are anti-American, pro-North Korean, and pro-Chinese. Okay? And they are pro-communist. Therefore, they are against American value and ideology. And also, some leaders of those rebuild Korea type of evangelical Christian Protestant in South Korea argue that President Trump, when and if he visits South Korea, he will help release President Yoon Suk-yeol from prison. And they portray President Trump as some kind of messiah to save right-wing conservatives in South Korea. Therefore, they have a very profound implication in South Korea, not only in domestic politics, but also foreign policy. And they are extremely anti-Chinese. They become the major forces of, public protest of China, anti-China slow. They organize almost every day demonstrations in the street, anti-China.
Thank you, Professor Moon. I have 3 questions. Firstly, how might China leverage historical grievances, economic interdependence, and regional security dynamics to influence or constrain the bilateral relationship between Japan under Takaichi premiership and South Korea under Lee Jae-myung administration? Secondly, how could China exploit and resolve the historical disputes such as wartime memory issues and economic dependencies, including trade and supply chain vulnerabilities, to exacerbate tensions between Tokyo and Seoul? Lastly, how might these maneuvers affect prospects for trilateral US, Japan, South Korea cooperation, North Korea deterrence, and broader stability on the Korean Peninsula? And to what extent could the domestic or political ideologies and nationalist constituencies in both countries amplify or mitigate China's attempt to manipulate the bilateral relationship? Thank you.
I think I should write a book to answer your questions, but I will try to be very succinct as I can. President Xi Jinping came up with very interesting things in Gyeongju. He was very friendly with President Lee Jae-myung, but he was very cold on Takaichi. The reason is very simple. Takaichi ended up meeting Taiwan delegate. And the Chinese government sent a message to the Japanese government, please don't do that. Now Xi Jinping is there, is going to be there. But if you meet the representative of Taiwan, okay, we cannot treat you nicely. But Takaichi ended up meeting the special advisor to Lai Ching-te in Gyeongju. Therefore, that was the reason. Okay. And therefore, we can get an impression that President Xi Jinping wanted to strengthen ties with South Korea while just ignoring Japan. Therefore, he may try to create cleavages between Seoul and Tokyo. But I really don't think so. But in other words, Prime Minister Takaichi self-invited that kind of response from, China. But again, Takaichi-san, she belongs to the Abe faction, and Abe faction values ties with Taiwan. Okay? And therefore, Takaichi-san became Prime Minister a few days ago. Therefore, he wanted to assure that her government values ties with Taiwan to Japanese constituents. There is all complicated domestic constituent, domestic politics and international standing. Second, as for history issues, there is a lesser degree of coordination between China and South Korea. But for Japan-South Korea relations, number one issue still is the comfort women issue. Number two issue, forced reparation for forced labor workers during Japanese colonial period. Third issue, and perhaps the most important issue, is territorial dispute over Tokto, Takeshima. Okay? And fourth issue is revision of the history textbook. Okay? And there are some other minor issues, but another important issue is whether Takaichi-san will pay tribute to Yasukuni Shrine or not. But among those five, and others are very protracted issues. But Takaichi-san's tribute to Yasukuni Shrine, she has been paying tribute to, you know what Yasukuni Shrine is? Yasukuni Shrine, is a special place to, commemorate the so-called those who killed during the Pacific War, and particularly the 13 members of war criminals who were sentenced to death by Tokyo War Tribunal. Their names are stored in the Yasukuni Shrine. Therefore, Koreans and Chinese have been arguing that if Japanese political leaders pay tribute to the Yasukuni Shrine, that means what they are not repenting their historical mistake of the past. War criminals. That is why Beijing and Seoul strongly opposed South Korea, the Japanese political leaders' tribute to Yasukuni Shrine. But Takaichi-san has always paid tribute to Yasukuni Shrine. Therefore, that was the most important litmus test, whether Japanese, South Korean leaders and Chinese leaders can get along with Japanese new leader. All those five issues are important, but the President Lee Jae-myung's approach is very clear. He told Prime Minister Takaichi that you cannot solve history issues very easily because they are all embedded in collective memory of Korean people. Even President cannot fix any problem. Therefore, that conflict will continue. However, we can try to minimize negative impact on conflict. However, we should promote cooperation in security and economic issues. Okay? That's what he calls two-track approach. Okay? Therefore, and also, President Lee Jae-myung has very unique aspect. What he told the Japanese leader that even though I have a different view from the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government, what President Yoon Suk-yeol government has committed to Japanese government, I will honor that. Okay? That's very important because Japanese government has been always criticizing South Korean government that whenever there is a change in government, South Korean government, pledges to change. Realizing that, President Lee Jae-myung said that I will continue to honor. Okay? Therefore, even though President Lee Jae-myung may not like Prime Minister Takaichi, they agreed to have a shared diplomacy. Therefore, even he proposed to have a next summit meeting in Nara, which is the hometown of Prime Minister Takaichi. Therefore, in a sense, it's yet to be seen. But the most important litmus test will be whether Prime Minister Takaichi will pay a tribute to Yasukuni Shrine or not. Okay. And about Korea-Japan, U.S. relations, President Biden gave a lot of emphasis on U.S.-Japan, South Korean relations. He thought it is like a prelude to creation of NATO, Northeast Asian Treaty Organization. Going back to 1954, then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles proposed idea of creation of NATO. But then President Lee of South Korea rejected it, and also Japanese government also rejected it. Therefore, American government could not create the NATO. But by adopting candidate declaration among Kishida and Biden and Yoon Suk-yeol, and Biden was able to revive old John Foster Dulles' dream of creating NATO, okay, by adopting candidate declaration. However, President Trump doesn't seem to be interested in it. Whenever, multilateral meeting like APEC, whatever, American government always come up with a proposal saying that let us have trilateral summit. Even not, even though they would not have a bilateral summit because of scheduling problem, then U.S. always come up with a trilateral meeting. No, U.S., Japan, South Korea, trilateral summit. President Trump never mentioned it. Therefore, in other words, if America is not interested in trilateral summit, its longevity will be questioned.
Simon. We have time, so then more question there.
Thank you for your time, Professor Moon, and I apologize, I've been asking you a lot of questions over the last couple of days, but overall, I have more of a technical question now regarding South Korea's military posture, and regarding particularly like strategic dilemmas with the North. I wonder if there's any changes in the military posture from South Korea which have led North Korea to change its nuclear doctrine, and what are the primary legs of the South Korean military? Like, does it focus a lot on artillery? Is it primarily through ground forces? And so just kind of, if you could give us a bit of an overview of the military situation from South Korea's point of view on the peninsula. Thank you.
Very good question, and also very sensitive questions. During the period of the Moon Chung-in government, his approach gave a lot of emphasis to the creation of peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, very similar to Ijeon, tension reduction, confidence building measures. So that he had a summit talk with Kim Jong-un, and also North and South Korea adopted a comprehensive military agreement that is all about military civilians, confidence building measures between the North and South. But when Yoon Suk-yeol became president, he began to argue that Moon Jae-in's peace initiative was nothing but fake peace initiative. Okay? He was pursuing the policy of humiliation to North Korea. Moon Jae-in has shown signs of weakness to North Korea. They can provoke, precipitate North Korea's offensive behaviors. And then he changed the military doctrine. Okay? Because Moon Jae-in has never used the term preemption or preemptive doctrine, but Yoon Suk-yeol adopted the preemption doctrine as the most important part. Okay? And South Korea at the time pursues so-called kill chain. The concept of kill chain. That is, South Korea detect the offensive move by North Korea, we would come up with preemptive strike on North Korea. And also Korean version of missile defense system, and also massive retaliation and punishment strategy. If we fail to intercept North Korea's incoming missile and we are being hit, then we come with maximum retaliation against North Korea. But it's the first X, it's kill chain. Second axis is missile defense system. Third one is massive retaliation and punishment. Therefore, President Yoon Suk-yeol began to send the message to North Korea. We are going to make a preemptive strike. And more than that, when he talked about massive retaliation against North Korea, most important part of that strategy is what? Decapitation strategy. Having mocked the North Korean leadership. Okay. And therefore, his military doctrine changed from defensive to offensive. Okay. Defensive turns to preemption doctrine. And also he included the decapitation strategy. Okay. Heading up the North Korean leadership. And he began to implement those things in terms of actual military exercise and training. For example, South Korea, the conservative government used to conduct the joint military training with American Special Forces called the team knife training, team knife exercise, tick knife. That is what? That is decapitation in exercise. They did in the past, but never announced. But under Yoon Suk-yeol government, they officially announced ROK Special Forces and American Special Forces conducted Ting knife exercise to decapitate North Korean leadership. And plus, the progressive government in South Korea was very cautious in allowing the deployment of strategic weapons to South Korea, like carrier battle groups, or submarine-launched ballistic and cruise missiles, or B-1B strategic bombers. We have to be very cautious, because such kind of deployment would provoke North Korea. But Yoon Suk-yeol government not only allowed, they strongly encouraged the US to deploy those strategic weapons as projection of power against North Korea. Then that kind of South Korean behavior provoked North Korea to lead toward their own doctrine of preemption. And another important factor is Putin behavior in Ukraine. And I would say that was a kind of sufficient condition. South Korea's preemption doctrine is a necessary condition, but sufficient condition came from Russia.
Francesco, where is the mic?
I have the microphone and I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, Diego, go ahead, no, because Francesco was in line, but it's okay. It's okay. We have time. Go ahead, Diego.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Maybe stand up if you don't
But
mind.
by the way, would you identify your name?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Diego Ballero and I teach international affairs and political science here at John Cabot University. Thank you very much for your lecture, very, very interesting. This is my question. Thinking about the future of the Korean Peninsula, what lessons can we draw from the experience of Germany? Germany has been partitioned, it has had to manage for several decades relations in an environment where it was not possible to unify them. Germany also has unified, and this created tremendous political, economic challenges. So, what is your take? What lesson can we draw from this experience? This is my question. Thank you very much.
And on this, I have my two fingers because I think it's super interesting, like the model of integration, like the German one and the European Union model. So I think they may be interesting. You want to take one more, or you want to respond this?
I think that's a very important question. I think they should be separate too. When we talk about unification in Korea, it is very important for us to understand what is meant by unification. Unification could mean one single unified nation states. Okay? That is the ultimate wish of North and South Korea. But that kind of unification can be achieved either absorption of North Korea by the South or North Korea's communization of South Korea by force. Because neither North and South Korea cannot pursue that kind of unification policy. Then another type of unification policy is, therefore, the North Korean communization of South Korea is like a Vietnamese model. South Korean absorption of North Korea is a German model. Okay? But neither is feasible. Therefore, what we talk about is, what North Koreans talk about is what? Federation or confederation. Kim Il-sung and his son Kim Jong-in always proposed federation and confederation model. That means what? One Korean people, one state, two local government, and two systems. Okay. But in the case of, therefore, one model is the German model or US model, another model is old Czechoslovakia and Switzerland model. Okay. Confederation, more decentralized. But South Korean model of unification is different from it. In 1989, then President Roh proposed Korean Commonwealth model. That has become the foundation of South Korean policy and unification. According to that model, one Korean people will have two states. Okay. and two governments and two systems. However, will promote exchange and cooperation and peaceful coexistence. And then, when there can be free flow of people, goods, and services, then we can create union of North-South Korean states, like a European Union. Okay? And we call it de facto unification, as opposed to de jure unification. Then third stage is so-called Korean unification. But that one, particularly President Kim Dae-jung made a very good point, is up to our descendants. They're assuming that there will be a higher degree of homogeneity between North and South Korea. Then North-South Korean people have a national referendum and decide on the ultimate form of unification. Okay? There could be federation, confederation, single unified nation state, or union of North-South Korean state, or just two separate states. There is third state. The third state will be determined by our descendants. What we have to do is exchange, cooperation, peaceful coexistence, first stage. Second stage, union of North-South Korean states. Therefore, we can have summit meetings, institutionalized summit meetings, ministerial meetings, inter-Korean parliamentary meetings, and etc. There is South Korean model. But now Kim Jong-un is saying that we don't want none of them. Okay? We don't want federation, we don't want confederation, we don't want union of North-South Korean state. There is a very difficult situation for South Korea. Therefore, again, it's an ambivalence. Therefore, it's like on the one hand, we want unification. Unification is our dream. When unification is close, we blow away. That kind of ambivalence is deeply embedded in Korean society.
Francesco.
Thank you for the wonderful and precise analysis that you're providing. I've been observing the history and the evolution between North Korea and South Korea. And there's a question that is a bit of an exercise. I'm Francesco Abenta, and I'm the director of the Institute of Future and Innovation Studies here at GSU. So part of my job is to do scenario analysis. And for obvious reasons, history has changed. So one of the things I started to look is the cause of war. And future analysis, it's not simply prediction, it's very methodical. And I started to think that it was important for me to start to have a method to observe the causes of war, because normally they're based on some triggers that are almost very minute. So I started to ask questions to people to try to understand these scenarios. So what I would like to ask is, the model I use, this philosopher is called Thucydides, that talked about war. And he says that every war starts only for three reasons. It's either fear, honor, or interests. It's one of these three, or the three combined. Every war starts because of fear, honor, or interests. Now, the situation between North and South Korea is in many ways very stable, because you're describing an ecosystem that is very balanced somehow because of the specific conditions where normal perception will imply that these conditions will last for a long time, because you have a very stable system on one side and a changing system on the other side. But the fact that the stable system on the north is very stable makes it somewhat predictable in theory. Now, with your own cultural understanding and your own knowledge of your own history, of these three drivers, what is the most risky element that might lead what seems rational now to become irrational? Because there's always a moment in war where something that seems rational becomes irrational and acts up as the driver for these events to blow up. Tension leads to fight. But so, what is your perception of these deep-rooted cultural emotions, and what are the most risky, and how would you look at it?
That's a very good question. For North Korea, honor matters. North Korean leader is a supreme dignity. In North Korea, there is a theory of social organism. There is a leader called Suryang. Suryang creates a party creates a state creates a people, and these days, people create a military. And Suryang, leader, party, state, people, the military. 5 create the unity of a pentagonity. But of this, the genesis of entire this social organism is Suryang, leader. Leader is a supreme dignity. Any insult on supreme dignity should be cursed. Okay? Therefore, if you analyze North Korean behavior, it's more honor and dignity than fear and interest. Okay? Therefore, in many cases, we see very irrational behavior of North Korean foreign policy. But sometimes we know that North Korea will be losing a lot of interest. However, to save face of the leader, they would do it. Okay. But fear could be an integral part, because as a result of Korean War and American air bombing on North Korea, Pyongyang was worse than Dresden. Therefore, North Koreans have an inherent fear of American military attack. But as a trigger of a major conflict on the Korean Peninsula, if we undermine supreme dignity of North Korea, that can be a pretext for North Korea's aggressive behavior. South Korea is fear, because South Korean population is about 52 million population, about 22 million people living in the 60 kilometers from the front line. And North Korea amassed more than 10,000 long-range artillery pieces and plus short-range ballistic missiles along the demilitarized zone. Therefore, South Korean society is extremely vulnerable. And also, 90% of our semiconductor manufacturers are in the firing range of North Korean long-range artillery pieces within 60 kilometers. Therefore, we are vulnerable. Therefore, if anything happens along the DMZ, West, whatever, then we have inherent fear. And in my generation, I was born during the Korean War. Therefore, we have inherent fear of outbreak of war. Therefore, as to your question, for North Korea, honor and dignity. South Korea, fear. That could be source of the real problem on the Korean Peninsula.
Do you think that is the reason why they're not picking up the phone, the North Koreans?
That is, I think, not because of the honor, it is because of the interest calculation. Therefore, in other words, if for example, President Trump says that one day before he's coming to Korea, he said, "Oh, if I meet, Kim Jong-un, I can lift some of sanctions." But he should have done that 10 days before, not one day before. Therefore, even President Trump, even 10 days before the proposed the summit, if President Trump said that, okay, if you freeze and reduce nuclear weapons and missiles, I will normalize diplomatic ties with you. Okay, I will lift some of important sanctions, and also I will suspend, allocate U.S. joint military exercise and training. Kim Jong-un should have come to the dialogue, but there's no message. Then that goes to the what? In February 28 and 9, Hanoi in 2019, he took the train for 60 hours to attend the meeting. And before he left Pyongyang, he told the Pyongyang citizens, I'll come back to Pyongyang with great achievement. He came back with empty-handed. He lost face. In North Korean society, Surya never makes mistakes. Okay. He doesn't want to make another mistake. Then his regime will be in trouble. His legitimacy will be in trouble. Therefore, there's no incentives, no concrete incentive coming from Trump. Kim Jong-un is not that, not in that good position to meet President Trump for just casual talks, okay, and being an extra for President Trump. But he calculated.
Okay, Moose, and then down there.
Thank you again, Professor. A question on the reunification process, especially the last one that we discussed on two states, two systems, and just the gradual process of creating a homogeneous society, and ultimately they decide on the ultimate step how to unify. So we know that South Korea is more competitive and North Korea relies more on welfare, and if you're loyal to the government, then you kind of can manage to survive, whereas in South Korea, if you're not competitive, it's quite complicated. In that process of allowing the flow of goods, people, services, etc., how can we prevent South Korea being a concentration of very talented, competitive individuals, and North Korea individuals that kind of rely on state welfare? Would we have to create a prerequisite where one focuses on manufacturing and the other unique on services, or will that simply be the fate of both countries, where one is very competitive and capitalistic and the other is ultimately extremely socialist with no escape? Thank you.
I think that they should manage interaction between the North and South. But conservative people talk about unification by absorption. And like Germany, one day North Korea became part of South Korea, Republic Korea. Then North Korea become OECD member overnight. Okay, then what will happen? North Korea, as part of South Korea, is not entitled to any ODA from other OECD members. South Korea should come up with the money. South Korean economy is not as rich as the German economy. Even Germany had a hard time in post-unification process. Okay. And also, North and South Korea are extremely heterogeneous in industrial structure, educational system, overall pattern of socialization. Therefore, it takes time. Therefore, I strongly oppose unification by absorption. Okay? And in order to reduce cost of unification, it is better for North and South Korea go through the process of union of North-South Korean state, okay, and manage the unification rather than spontaneous and abrupt unification. Therefore, we should be. I did this one research on the cost of unification depending on the scenario. Therefore, unification, Korean unification after war, like Vietnam, most expensive. Unification by absorption, German model, second most expensive. Okay, and Yemeni model. Okay, and it was unification by consensus, at least in the beginning, right? Least expensive. Therefore, it is important for us to keep that in mind. Therefore, also it is, instead of going to outright unification, it is essential for us to go through the process, stage of integration. And while even integration is not easy, because North Korea cannot form an economic community with South Korea, okay, if they retain socialist system. We talk about economic integration means what? Free trade area, customs union, common market, economic union, monetary union. Okay? Unless North Korea adopts capitalist system, adopt the sound fiscal monetary system, we cannot go for the integration. Therefore, they should be trained in North Korea. Therefore, it is not really easy to pursue that kinds of approach. Oh yes, yes.
We have one question down there. Maybe then we can wrap up.
I want to thank you again, Professor Moon, for coming to speak with us tonight. One thing that I found very interesting.
What is your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Hunter, and I'm an undergrad here at JCU studying international affairs. And one point that you touched on was the anxiety currently about a new Cold War branching out from the current political state on the peninsula. And what I'm curious about is your view on the pragmatic approach to South Korean relations with countries in the South China Sea and with Taiwan relative to South Korea's relationship with China.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, I can. Okay, together. Please go ahead.
Okay, go.
Yes, my question is,
Introduce.
okay, I'm Pietro Masina, I'm teaching here Political Southeast Asia and Oriental Naples history and so on. Secretly, on the international news, North Korea is presented as on the verge of economic collapse. This is what we hear, but it's still there. But it's still there because 90% of North Korean export is going to China. You said before that China does not have big leverage, that North Korea is not listening to China, but I guess it's because China is not pushing hard enough, because China will be able to have more voice on Korea. And it would not be in the Chinese interest to try to encourage North Korea to go in the direction of economic reforms like Vietnam. And some years ago, that was a feeling that North Korea was looking at that model as a possibility to maintain political stability in the process of economic reforms and to strengthen, in fact, leadership. And why this is not happening? Why what is China doing with North Korea? And if there is any dialogue in this sense between China and South Korea?
Going back to your question, yes, United Nations has adopted 6 sanction resolutions of North Korea, okay, and also the United States has the UN Security Council resolutions, one thing, but the United States unilateral sanctions, mostly secondary boycott. Okay, no country can take money into North Korea. That's to send the money in North Korea. Even United Nations officials should carry cash. Okay? Therefore, you cannot do business with North Korea because North Korea cannot open letter of credit. Okay? But here, one thing we should be aware of clearly, that is why. UN Security Council sanction resolutions do not cover livelihood goods. Okay? Therefore, Chinese trade with North Korea under livelihood goods, foodstuffs and whatever, they are exempted from sanctions. Okay. There was some confusion when you talk about the sanction on North Korea. It covers everything. No. Okay. Second, Chinese officials always complain. We are doing everything to enforce UN Security Council sanction resolutions. But we cannot handle those smuggling because the Yalu River and Tumen River has a long borderlines. In a certain area, like in the Tumen river part, just the river between China and North Korea is 3 meters. And there are virtually no guard on the part of China. Therefore, smuggling is quite common between the two. Okay. Therefore, Chinese argument is this. The United States has always been arguing China. You have all the leverages. 93% of North Korean trade is with China. Therefore, if you can exercise more influence in North Korea will listen to China. China tried, but it didn't work. Okay? Therefore, in reality, it is extremely difficult to enforce UN Security Council sanction resolutions. But as for the American secondary boycott means, meaning financial control, that works. Even Chinese banks and financial institutions have been complying with US demand. That was a critical blow to North Korean economy. But again, the way I observe is there are fundamental limits to the sanctions. Sanction for the sake of sanction is not likely to work. That now North Korea is getting food and energy from Russia. It's not big, but they can still mitigate overall problems in North Korea. Therefore, and North Korea getting closer, then China is also seems to be changing its mind, and China is likely to be more lenient about its economic relations with with North Korea. That being the case, the US will be in a very, very difficult position. Therefore, it's yet to be seen. And the Hunter's question about the new Cold War structure, and when you talk about new Cold War structure, we're talking about the US, Japan, South Korea triangular southern axis versus Beijing, Moscow, Pyongyang, northern trilateral axis. And then old Cold War, like old Cold War, those two southern and northern axes confront each other and show very high degree of cohesiveness among themselves. But current South Korean government does not want. Chinese government does not want. Hardliners in the US and hardliners in Japan want to see the revival of old Cold War structure. Therefore, I would say now is a very gray area is emerging. Therefore, for example, Professor Michael Doyle of Columbia University argued that I really don't think that there is an arrival of new Cold War in Northeast Asia. It's simply cold peace. Okay? Therefore, now he argues that in the contingency in Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, China, Japan, the Philippines, and US may work together. It is very unlikely to South Korea directly involved in it. ASEAN countries are not likely to involve it. They need to be very much US, Japan, the Philippines versus China. Okay? Therefore, it is a somewhat different calculation on the part of countries in that part of the world.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Moon, and please join me in thanking Professor Moon. I would like to thank all the team that is helping us at the Guarini, and actually our director, Professor Federico Argentieri, that is here with us tonight, for putting all this together, and all the students that are attending until this time of the day, and colleagues who came here all the way from other universities. This is the way we want a Guarini event to be, and so thank